Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special video. Through the magic of the internet, which is a series of tubes, a joke which was much funnier when I first read it.
It goes way back.
I got into contact with the legendary Chris Crawford, and Chris, you graciously agreed to sit down and have this conversation with me. Before we go any further, would you like to give a bit of an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, I studied physics in grad school and taught physics for a few years before going to Atari because I had become enamored of computers, bought myself one of the early personal computers, and did some games and ran research at Atari until it collapsed, games research at Atari until it
Hmm.
collapsed. Went independent, did some games, founded the Game Developers Conference, gave up on games around 91 actually, and then I worked on interactive storytelling for 30 years, which was a failure because it was an immensely difficult problem. But about 5 years ago, I realized that I could use a completely different strategy. And that worked. I built something called Morte D'Arthur, which I'm satisfied is first genuine piece of artistic interactive storytelling. And this met my life goal. And
Mhm.
so I can now work on the forest I live in and feel satisfied with achieving my life goal.
That's awesome. I've played. I will admit I haven't finished it, but I'm about an hour or so into Le Morte D'Arthur. I'm very, very intrigued by it. I'm gonna. I think I have to start over again though, because I've just sort of been playing it on and off. Um,
Hmm.
I think it's something that maybe is better appreciated in longer sessions than I've been giving it.
It is big. It is not a game, not a puzzle. It's
Yeah.
not fun. It's art, and it's about the meaning of life.
Yes. If you're used to picking up keys in Zelda to access deeper into the dungeons, this is not that. You talked about having led games research back at Atari. It seems to me the further back into the history of video game design I go, it always seems to me like before budgets ballooned into these $100 million monstrosities, there just seems to have been much more an atmosphere for creativity and experimentation. Do you think that the improvement in computer power ensured that games would become about moving around more and more detailed environments?
No, it didn't ensure that. The industry took that course. Uh, as we spent more and more money, we could afford less and less risk and experimentation. Back in the early 80s, when games were done by one person, it really, you could do all sorts of crazy things. And if you failed, it was only your time that you lost. But nowadays, we're too expensive to engage in really good experimentation. The other reason why there's so much mapping and spatial concentration on spatial reasoning is that the industry is still dominated by males. The industry likes to talk about, oh yeah, we do games for women too, and it's true there are plenty of women playing. Nevertheless, if you look at photographs of the Game Developers Conference, you will. I took one big photo of a big crowd at the conference and just went through counting faces, and I found something like 3% of those faces were female. So
Oof.
it's still a male dominated industry, and males specialize in spatial reasoning, which is why we have so many maps and so many games about moving around. It is also greatly encouraged by the fact that we have visual screens. And what better to show on a screen than a map or a spatial vista? So it's there are a lot of factors pushing the industry more towards spatial stuff than social stuff.
Do you think that those factors might also be why men are more gravitated to making games?
Uh, well, it's sort of a a vicious circle, or more of a self-confirming circle. That is, we started off doing spatial because that was the easiest thing to do. Well, that attracted men and didn't attract so many women, which led to more spatial stuff, which led to more concentration by men, and it just went round and round. And
Mm,
now it's locked into that. It's if you violate that, people say, well, that's not a game.
yeah. I have another question, which has to do with the spatial props nature of video games. So, classical storytelling, you have a stage that's just the setting the drama takes place in. You have props which facilitate different actions, and then you have actors who are the human beings, and the utility of the props and the way in which they navigate the stage. That is all downstream of their interpersonal relationships and how they are feeling. Video games are very good at handling props, stages, and their interactions with each other. But to this day, we've not really gotten a good grasp of how to make the dynamic interactions of people very interesting. What is it that is the big stumbling block here? Is it that it's more complex, or
Oh, yeah.
oh yeah,
Yeah, interpersonal interaction is immensely more complex than the physical interaction. It's really easy to calculate the trajectory of a bullet or whether or not somebody is carrying a particular prop, yes or no. The stuff in games is computationally quite simple. The trickiest part was always 3D. And when the first 3D games started coming out, primarily Doom in the 90s, this was a great breakthrough and people were terribly excited about it. And nowadays, that's standard. Um, but interpersonal stuff, the problem is it has so many uh, connections to it. That is, sure, you can talk about how much the guy loves the gal or the gal loves the guy. You can have a number for that, but then what are the factors that affect that? And oh geez, there's so many factors to take into account, and it can look really stupid if you miss one. Let me give you a fun example of something like this. In my around 1993 or 94, I was working on one of my earlier attempts at interactive storytelling. It too was based on the legends of King Arthur, and I was
this is
working.
Excalibur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, no, I'm sorry. This was it was an early attempt at Le Morte d'Arthur, but I ended up abandoning it.
Okay.
Uh, but I was worried about how people gossip with each other and what they actually talk about, because there was an awful lot happening in this design, and I couldn't have them spend all day talking about all the stuff they knew. So I needed a priority system for what they would talk about, and I came up with an algorithm with three components. First, you talk about things that are important to you. Second, you talk about things that are important to the person you're talking to. Third, you talk about things that are important to the person about whom you are talking. I had already developed an algorithm for determining how important an event is to a particular character, so I was applying that here. Since this was a King Arthur, eventually Lancelot managed to bed Guinevere, and he was so pleased. He next morning he comes out and runs into King Arthur, and he applies the algorithm. Wow, having sex with Guinevere, that's really important to me. And it's really important to Guinevere. And it's really important to Arthur. So Lancelot says, Hey, Arthur, guess what? I just had sex with Guinevere. I realized this is a lot more complicated than I realized. So, this is just one little example of just how difficult interactive storytelling can be.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I think you wrote about that in on interactive storytelling.
It's a good story about how easily you can fail.
Yeah, I wonder then. I think one snack, which once you start going down the road of interactive storytelling, I think one snack that could really trip you up is that there is a big difference between using a game to simulate how a human being works and using a game to simulate how a character in a drama works.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. A lot of people do not appreciate that a character is not at all a human being. Most human beings are boring because they play it safe. I mean, how many times are you watching a horror movie and the person says, Oh, look, here's a dark mansion. I see blood red eyes peering out the window. I think I'll go in and see what's going on. And you say,
Yeah.
No, no, don't go in there. They go in anyway. That's the difference between a character and a real person. And
Yes.
so you don't use personality models, or at least you don't use personality models from psychologists, because they're about real people, not characters. You have to think in terms of drama, not reality. It's not a simulation, it's a story.
And for the purposes of this discussion, maybe it helps a little bit if we get into what we mean by interactivity. You gave a really good definition of it because I see a lot of video games come out which I do not believe really are interactive. So this is a
Mm,
video game. I'm not going to name names here. I don't want to disparage anybody, but this is the. Do you have you heard the term walking simulator?
no.
This is a sort of derogatory way of referring to games where you start the game, maybe you're on a beach or just wherever, and you walk, and as you're walking, a voiceover speaks in the background, and the voiceover is just long enough that it will always finish before you move to the next section, and there is no other activity. You are just walking to reach the next area while the voiceover talks.
That that's a game.
Oh, there were a lot of these during the big sort of onset of indie games back in 2009, 2010.
Wow.
Yeah, I would
Uh,
say not interactive.
yeah, yeah. What's the point?
Yeah, because my contention at the time was that I might just as well watch a video of this. That I'm not, there's nothing really different about this as a movie versus a game. And you gave a description or definition of interactivity in on interactive storytelling, which is a let's see if I get it right. It's you have two actors who trade places, listening, thinking, and responding.
Yeah, here's the formal. I've managed to memorize the formal definition. Interaction is a cyclic process in which each of two active agents alternately listen, think, and speak.
And so for the walking sim, on one hand, you have the player who presses a button. Maybe he's speaking. That's him pushing a button, and the
Yeah,
character moves, and there's no reply. There's no like even Pac-Man has interactivity because the ghosts kind
yes,
of can
yes,
figure, okay, I can see Pac-Man. Now I'm gonna go chase him.
yeah,
But these games, which were being lauded as being breakthrough breakthroughs in video game storytelling, I feel like they don't even pass the mustard of being interactive.
yeah.
And
I'm surprised.
and for the idea of interactive storytelling, what we mean is not just that there is a story around a game wherein you can interact, but rather that the story itself, do you see the story as being something which is generated from the systems the game runs on, or is it, can you like pre-script the story and then just have the player sort of weave in and out of it?
Okay, fundamental concept here.
Okay.
Story, storytelling. A story is a thing. It's data. It's
It's a
fixed.
noun.
Yes, a noun.
Yes.
Storytelling, that's a verb. That's something you do. Interaction is about doing, not being. Story exists, storytelling happens. And so, yes, you cannot have an interactive story. I'm sorry, the phrase interactive story is an oxymoron. It can't happen. In order to have true interactive storytelling, you've got to make change. Now, there is a catch to this. Most people interpret that to mean that the events have to change. That is, they think of interactive storytelling in terms of a branching tree. The problem with that is that stories are necessarily long, and a branching tree, let's imagine the absolute minimum branching tree. You get only two choices for each event. So an event takes place, you can take door A or door B. Okay, and then if you go to door A, then you got two more choices. And so you get this tree that branches out. Well, you get the geometric explosion. After only 10 steps into the story, 10 events, you've got 1,000 elements in that tree. After 20 steps, you've got 1,000,000
Yes.
uh, events in that tree. You can't possibly generate all of that. Uh, it turns out the solution is you don't branch on events, you branch on internal variables. And that's what I do with Morte D'Arthur. It's a linear story. You get the same story, bang, 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 all the way to the end. But for each event that takes place, you are given options to react to the event, and your reactions define who you are. That is, you can take it's sort of like a psychology test where there's a an umpire watching you taking actions and then saying, oh, he's not very generous, is he? And ooh, he loses his temper easily. Okay. Oh, well, that was a nice thing to do. I'll make a mark for that. And uh, at the very end, you get your only event branching, and that is the outcome, the result of the story, the ending. And in fact, for complex reason, this is actually closer to real storytelling than a branching tree. Uh, how do I say this in 25 words or less? Stories are not about what happens during the story, they're about the ending. Star Wars, Episode 4, Luke Skywalker blows up the Death Star. Uh, all that other stuff, rescuing Princess Leia, uh, that could have been completely different. They could have said, we just got to get out of here. Screw her. Let them execute her. And they could have gone on and still had essentially the same story. What mattered in that story was at the very end, Lucas in the trench, Darth Vader has come up behind him, and he's about to blow him up when Luke hears Obi-Wan say, Luke, use the Force. And there's the crisis of the story where Luke has to make a decision. Do I trust everything I've done in the past with the targeting computer and all of that stuff, or do I go with the Force? And that's the whole story. Do I trust the Force, my intuition? And he makes his decision to trust the Force, and it works. That's the story at the very end. And all the other stuff could have gone, you could have done a million variations on that, but you can't vary that one moment of crisis without completely changing the story.
Yes. I think you also once described it as imagine you just go through the story. I think you used the itsy bitsy spider, but then you just cut off the ending. So now he doesn't go
Yeah.
back up the water spout. The sun doesn't dry anything. What you have then is 95% of the story but it's worthless. There's nothing to this because
Yes,
it doesn't have
yes.
a conclusion.
Yep.
So today, when video game storytelling innovations are discussed, it is usually, and we talked a bit about this before we started recording, it's usually the ways in which the prefixed narrative can be wrapped around differently, such that uh, the interactive components of the game allow you to approach it from different angles, in different order, and such. Or its ways to incorporate failure states like death into the narrative, which is actually rather easy. You just write, "This is a world where people die and then they come back."
Mm.
Simple enough.
It is possible to have some branching without it blowing up. I did that with Morte D'Arthur. There are actually quite a few places where there are small trees. So you're going down the linear sequence, and then you reach a little tree and you go through that tree, and then you come back to the same linear sequence and go down, and then there's another tree. Uh, that can be made to work, but relying on the interaction based on changing the events of the story is it doesn't work. That's what everybody starts off doing, and everybody fails at that. Now, I tried to solve that problem with something that in computer science is called a directed graph. You come up with generalized versions of events that can be localized with specific details. For example, you can have an event called talk, or better yet, request. And then you can plug in, I request that this person perform this verb with on that direct object. And I make my request this passionately. And
Hmm.
so now you have a general thing that can be done many, many different times, many different ways, and doesn't feel repetitive. And yet, the system as a whole can keep coming back to that one that you request this, or no, if you can demand it, or you can advise it. That's one way to get variation. However, I worked on that approach, that strategy for 25 years. I think it can be made to work, but it's a lot more complicated. In fact, I did get it working, but actually using it to design something is very difficult.
Would it be possible, do you think, if you just simplify the expressions necessary? So, going back to the itsy bitsy spider, the itsy bitsy spider does not need to have despair. Like that story works fine without complex emotions like that. Doesn't need to have fear of his boss or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, you could that would be actually using more childlike stories, which are always simpler. Um, and maybe we need to go maybe we need to use what oh, what's his name? One of the most fascinating laws, which isn't quite correct from biology, is ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which means that uh, the growth and maturation of a creature roughly parallels the evolutionary history of that species. So it's most obvious in embryology when you start off with a single cell, a fertilized egg. Well, that's how life started, as a single cell. And then it starts dividing. And after a while, it starts to look like, well, in fact, at one point in human, in the fetus, kind of looks a little like a reptile. It has a tail, and later
Mm.
on it loses it. And so that whole process, one replicates the other. And perhaps we need to do that with storytelling. That is, perhaps our evolution of storytelling needs to follow the evolution, in this case, the phylogeny of storytelling should recapitulates the ontogeny of storytelling. That is, we start off telling children's stories, and then we tell teen stories, and then finally we tell adult stories.
So
Maybe that's what we had to do.
crawl, walk, run.
Exactly.
Do you think it's possible that the spatial simulation game was then maybe necessary before we could get into real interactive storytelling? Or do you think there's a big enough divergence between these two approaches to game design that you could have had one without the other?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the storytelling approach is just immensely more complex. And so the spatial approach was the obvious starting uh, for the games industry. My hope had been that we would start off with the spatial stuff, maneuvering around through an area, go left, go right, and run, walk, whatever. And then we would evolve along with that into more social games. And in fact, I tried that way back at Atari with the game Excalibur, which did have actually, it had resource management, it had maps, it had battles, but it also had a social element to it. And my hope was that we could develop games like that and the social element could grow more and more sophisticated. The industry did not follow up on that initiative.
No. Did you ever play immersive sims? Like, did you ever introduce yourself to those as a genre of game design?
No, no, I did not.
In short, they're the best design. If you're going into props and spaces as a video game, these are the best way of approaching it because all of the interactions are uniform. So you can have a game like Mario where here is an oil spill, and if you drop a match on it, a fire will come up. In an immersive sim, you can just pick up a bottle of oil, throw it anywhere in the world, and throw a match into it, and a fire will come up no matter what. And so
Hmm.
all of the objects and the environments will have standardized interactions across the entire game. I wonder if that's a kind you could approach interactive storytelling in a similar way, where imagine if it's a bit abstract, but imagine if you could just pick up happiness just as an idea and you could just throw it into a field of people and then that just sort of spreads around and then you could have again this is I'm kind of on the spot here thinking about this and it's a bit complex but then every single person in the crowd will have in their personality model what do I do when I am happy and then those behaviors are activated because happiness was just dropped in on them in the actual game probably you would have to do something to make them happy or make them sad or such. Uh, I'm just wondering if that's the same approach you would use.
Well, on the one hand, I will say that abstraction, which is you're describing one type of abstraction. In general, abstraction does make these kinds of things easier. However, the counterpoint is that that level of abstraction is not emotionally authentic.
Mm.
That is, people will feel like, well, this isn't a story. This is, I've got this happy thing that I like a happy grenade that I throw into the group. That doesn't quite feel right. So, yes, it's computationally a solution, but I don't think emotionally that's a good solution.
What if it's instead of thinking about it as you just throw a happiness bomb, it's you take down the evil king who's oppressing the village, and then you everybody had a sort of anchor attached to them of here's just because I live in a cruel world, I'm depressed all the time. Here are the debuffs that I have, and now because the king is gone, those debuffs disappear.
In general, I would say it's better to have one-on-one emotional interaction than to try to uh
Save the world.
yeah, yeah, you really drama storytelling is about individuals interacting with each other.
Yeah. we talked earlier about verb and noun thinking. On interactive storytelling, you gave an example of goods versus services, and I think you said money versus commerce. If you think about story as static things, as a static thing, it's just like it's unmoving and it's just like it's the noun rather than the verb, then you can't really make place for any sort of interactivity in it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you wrote in on interactive storytelling that the remedy is to abstract it and not think about story, but think about story worlds. Is this something you still believe in?
Well, I use the term story world to to characterize the entire collection of characters, props, stages, and algorithms. That the whole package is a thing, and I call that thing a story world. But the interaction within the story world is carried out by algorithms. And so, yes, storytelling is about processes, not things.
Yes. So I'm wondering now, a game can end. You were talking earlier about how you can change the ending, but I'm still a little hung up on story as, I guess, story as emergence. Is this you must have something to say about this, because on one hand you could have a video game end with the princess passionately kissing the hero because he saved her. But does the story end that way because you created a cutscene where the princess kisses him, or does it end that way because the story manager, the sort of dungeon master in the game, just decided that that's the best way to end it? I find here a character that it works for, like the princess. I look into her personality model. She likes the player. Okay, it makes sense for her to kiss him. So, is there emergent storytelling just as a natural expression of complex systems? Is that possible?
Well, I've always uh, criticized the very notion of emergence. From what other people say is that, well, emergence is when the system produces uh, surprising results. And I rephrase that as saying emergence is when the system does something that you were too stupid to anticipate. Uh, that is, the designer should, I mean, if you're a designer, you're designing it, you should, I mean, you don't want to get into an airplane with an emergent design. Uh, it's we really want to know what's going to happen here. And so I would argue, yes, with computers, you can generate zillions of possibilities, but you should be able to think abstractly enough to be able to anticipate the general character of all those possibilities. So I don't like the idea of emergent storytelling. But I would argue that an excellent story, the ideal that we aim for, is uh, outcomes that cover a broad range of possibilities. Nevertheless, the overriding concern, though, here is that the creator of a story world, the author of interactive storytelling, has to have a point. You got to be, I mean, you don't want to just say, hey, here's a big dramatic sandbox, go in and play around and see what happens. That's okay as a toy. But I would argue that as an art form, you got to have something you want to say. And the story world should say what you want to say. So I would argue that emergence for artistic interactive storytelling, and it's pretty hard. I mean, drama does require some element of artistry. Um, you've got to you've got to have a clear conclusion that clearly makes your point.
I see. On a topic of branching narratives from earlier, do you think it's possible to design? Would it make sense then to maybe invert it? So if we can just sort of get around the insane amount of different choices you would have to design for, but that the ending will always be the same, but then there are two ways to get to the ending, and there are two other ways to get into that space. And then maybe you have two branching trees and they just sort of branch out and then back into each other.
Yeah, convergence.
Yes.
Uh, yes, that can work. It is a little tricky to pull off. The best example of it was actually at the Montreal World's Fair in 1968. A Czechoslovakian film crew came up with an interactive movie. I suggest you research it. It's a very interesting scheme, and it did have a clear point, even though in many ways, technically, it was fake interactivity, but it was nevertheless artistically a fascinating experiment.
So for choices you would give the player, these are meaningful choices. This is not a choice of, well, you can walk to the table, you can pick up a fork, and you can rotate it in your hand, because that's maybe fun to do, but that has no bearings on storytelling. There's no, like, maybe if you could use the fork to stab somebody, that would, that would impact the story. But what would be the role, do you think, of do you think it's possible to integrate both the sort of text-based interactive storytelling formula and the spatial relations one?
No, no, I think the spatial relations should be eliminated from good storytelling. I mean, there's no map for Star Trek. You cannot say where the planet Vulcan is or relative to the Klingon home world or the Romulan one. They don't need a map. They've gone more than 60 years now. They've been running that series, and there's no map. Even Star Wars, there's a we know a little bit about the map, but not much. Maps just get in the way of drama. You end up worrying about, well, how long would it take him to get there? And that's not how drama works. In drama, you don't have the hero say, "I'll be right there," and then you follow him walking and running and driving across. He just says, "I'll be there," and then he's there. That's how drama works. It's not about moving; it's about emotion.
I do wonder, because stages facilitate actions. Would it not make sense? Just playing a devil's advocate here, just trying to. Would it not make sense to still incorporate levels into storytelling? Because if King Arthur wants to get Mordred, but Mordred is on the other side of a massive lake, he obviously can't. So, wouldn't you want to have the player maybe have to think about these ways in which the environments inhibit or facilitate actions?
Well, it's a matter of of the dramatic laws of physics. That is, in the dramatic laws of physics, you don't need to worry about how to, if you're going to confront Mordred, your your only concern is the confrontation, not how you get there. I mean, you don't worry about, oh, did I forget my sword? Or I forgot to bring lunch. I better go back home and get some lunch. Those are not dramatically significant actions, and getting across the lake is not a dramatically significant action. You just if the point here is about confronting Mordred, then go ahead and confront him. Don't put in all these extraneous obstacles that have no dramatic significance to them. That's the key thing. Is this a computation, uh, or is this a puzzle, or is this drama? Drama presents emotional challenges, not physical ones.
Right. So even if we had even the idea that, well, as King Arthur, you want to confront him on the best terrain, that really isn't storytelling anymore. Now you're getting into strategy games.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's fine as a game. I mean, there are games and puzzles and resource management and all those other things. But if you want to do drama, then do drama.
I wonder then, what kind of role would something like a failure state present in interactive storytelling?
Uh, Expand on your meaning of the term failure state.
So the way we would think about failure state in something like Thief or Zelda is, well, in Thief it's a stealth game, and if you're spotted, that's kind of a failure state because now the enemies are going to try to get you. You're weak, you can't fight back. If you die in a video game, you have to retry a sequence. That's a failure state. In drama, is a failure state just I suppose you could attach dramatic meaning to failure states. So you're trying to get the loyalty of somebody, but you don't achieve it.
Well, no, the artist defines what he means by failure. Um, that is, in Luke's case, with Star Wars, we could talk about the failure being the failure to blow up the Death Star. But what's really important here is whether Luke accepts the Force. And so the failure state would be Luke doesn't accept the Force. He goes with the traditional way and thereby fails to blow up the Death Star. So the failure in the Death Star is the consequence of the failure of Luke. Um, that is, the goal here is not to blow up the Death Star, but for Luke to embrace the Force. Again, you define everything in terms of emotion, of drama. It's this is a profound shift in thinking, and that's one reason why the games industry has completely failed to make any progress on interactive storytelling. They're very much locked into a way of thinking, a
Mm.
paradigm about what constitutes interaction that focuses on the physical, on the spatial, and just can't seem to come to terms with the emotional. And that is, I think, will doom the games industry to being nothing more than interactive comics. That is, I suspect that at some point interactive storytelling will become viable. Now, here's an interesting little statistic. I looked this up. Uh, the comics industry gross revenue about $2 billion a year. The games industry about 200 billion a year. And if you accept the notion that games are kind of sort of interactivized comics, then you could say, well, taking a medium and interactivizing it makes it 100 times more successful. Okay, good. Well, think about storytelling like movies plus novels plus TV. Take all of that together, and when you interactivize it, you're going to get something 100 times more successful. That's interactive storytelling, and I think the relationship there of interactive storytelling to games will be analogous to the relationship between movies, TV, and radio and comic books.
Mm.
So, but again, this requires that fundamental shift in paradigms, not thinking in terms of the classic challenges of game design, that is spatial reasoning, resource management, puzzle solution, fast reactions. Throw all of that away and think only in terms of dramatic conflict. What's involved there?
Yes, a story is not a test of skill. There's a fundamental difference there. On paradigm shifts, so D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation is sort of famously thought about as like the birth of cinematic storytelling. Prior to that, and even after, when you look at the sort of first movies, they're novelties, kind of like how games are toys. And when they try
Yep.
storytelling, what you always see is that they have text telling you the story, so just literature, and then the movie just gives you context for it, but they don't have a grasp of how to use cinema to tell stories. Uh,
Yes.
I've for a long time thought that video game storytelling is basically stuck in that rut still, where we know how to tell stories, we just don't know how to tell interactive stories. We can make great movies, a lot of great movies in video games, but interactivity, the component that is essential to our medium, is relegated to gluing the story together and bridging the gap between the cutscenes rather than having being meaningful in and of itself.
I could reduce the whole thing if you want to boil it all down to just a very, very simple idea. Uh, Games are very male and focus on spatial reasoning, whereas interactive storytelling relies on social reasoning. These are two fundamental mental modules. The concept of the mental module is something that has evolved from studying human cognition in terms of evolution. And the brain is not a general purpose computer. It's more like a Swiss Army knife with different modules for doing different things. One of those modules is spatial reasoning, another is social reasoning. Males specialize in the spatial, females in the social, and that's why games can't do storytelling. They're still stuck in this spatial reasoning paradigm. And we have to shift over to social reasoning to do that. And that's an alien concept for most game designers.
I can see. I had an idea for a game, and this was born out of so the background for this conversation is that I reread on interactive storytelling because I've been trying to solve the problem you wrestled with for so long on my own. I was like, okay, well, he spent 30 years on it. Maybe I'll do it in a couple of months. I'll see. I'll see. I haven't accomplished it, but if you imagine it like a Zelda game, and maybe now that having talked to you and about the structural nature of what would be required for interactive storytelling, maybe this wouldn't work. But the idea would be that you wake up a stranger in a strange land, and all you have when you wake up is a dictionary with some pages in it. And you have a couple of words in there. And now you can walk around town and you only know a few words in the language that the people here speak. And so you can, when you first approach somebody, you can choose what kind of sentence you want to speak: a command, an expletive, a question, or just a general statement.
Hmm.
And they would all be formatted around Creole. So just basic, I go store, you give sword, just very, very basic stuff. And then you, through the adventure, would be unlocking new words. You stand outside of a clock tower, there's a sign that says clock tower, you just intuitively pick up the word clock tower. And now you can ask anybody about a clock tower, provided the clock tower is relevant to their personality model. So they live in the town with a clock tower, maybe they have some idea about a clock tower. Um, and the game, so the idea would be that the language that you're learning is formatted like Creole is, and um, as you progress through the story, you do so not necessarily by becoming stronger, but by unlocking more and more words and being able to
Yeah.
communicate with people in deeper ways.
Um, First, this is very much how I started off thinking about interactive storytelling. I recognizing that language is the central problem, but it is not computable, at least not full language. And so I also spent a lot of time on Creole approaches. Um, and yes, what's strong about that idea is the notion of developing linguistic abilities so that you can talk to people. That's how you do so much emotional interaction. However, you're making it a puzzle, and
Ah,
that's the focus should be on the on the emotional challenge, that is, I would suggest some alternative emotional issues in that how do I become a member of this society, or how do I uh, uh, you run into different people and they have different personalities. There's some conflicts, and you run into one guy and he's just a mean person, and you end up running away from him, and how are you going to cope with him? And well, maybe you could befriend some of the people, but again, you don't want to make that just a uh, I need a walking weapon here to fight the bully.
Mm.
You run into a cute girl, and gee, maybe you could hook up with her, and but the emphasis should be on the human interactions, on the relationships with people, and uh, and so I would focus on that element. Try to get away from the physical or the puzzle aspects of it, and focus instead on the emotional aspects. Where are the emotional challenges in a situation like that? What's the uh, how does a person develop relationships like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You could actually take that a little further and do it with just a small group, that Robinson Crusoe, and he runs into Friday, and here's this other person who talks to you in a completely different language, and that's still too puzzle-like. Actually, what's ironic about this is that my very first attempt in this direction, uh, in fact, I will digress quite a bit here. Uh, in 1986, I had a very traumatic experience. We had a cat named Bootsy, and he was injured very seriously. And it was on Christmas Eve, and there weren't many veterinarians open. And I eventually found a veterinarian about 50 miles away. And so I put Bootsy in the car and drove to that veterinarian. And on the way, I wanted to talk to him and explain what was going on. And of course, I couldn't, and try to empathize with him. That led me to design the most creative game I've ever designed, which I just flipped his name around and called the game Seaboot. And in it, the very first version of it uh, had this multi species society where there were 7 different species and they each spoke a different language. And you were one of them, or you were one species among 7, and you had to somehow communicate with these people. The very first version of it had what was in effect a plane crash, and you and 6 other people, each from a different species, are stranded in this jungle, and you've got to somehow get out of there, and you had to cooperate together. That was an interesting idea, and it could have worked. I, however, ended up changing it into a much bigger version of the same thing. You've got a colony on the moon of a planet, and so there are several hundred people, all of different species, and they are stranded when the home planet has a nuclear war, and so they have to work out how to survive. So, and for that, I developed uh, a common language that was um, ESP type language. You thought the words and communicated them in your thinking, and then at night you had dream combat. Uh, Really weird game. It was the most creative thing I've ever done. Uh, and I'm very proud of it, but it wasn't a commercial success. It was too weird.
Do you think primitive language is necessary, at least at the early stages?
I think it is one way to go. The design I came up with, the solution I came up with is something I called the upside down palm tree, where basically you tell a linear story and at the very bottom there's some branching. That's what I did with Morte D'Arthur, and that works and it's easy to do. I am building a tool that will make it easy for people to use it, and it doesn't even involve anything like code.
Oh,
Uh, Not even any visible mathematics. There is internal math, but the author need not worry themselves about the math. The way they implement it is all very graphical. So I actually got the editor for that uh, just about ready to go into beta. So I don't know if I will actually publish it, but if I do, I'll make it free. And, this is something to maybe get the industry kick-started. So
yeah.
we'll see.
All right then. I will eagerly await that. I would like to close this out now, since I've run out of
Yes.
questions. Uh,
Okay, good. Yeah,
but
I
I
gotta go too. I guess.
All right then. Thank you so much for doing this. You've been a tremendous inspiration to me over the years, and I was kind of blown back when I saw you actually reply to my email because I had such a dumb username. uh, but yeah, so I'm really thankful for you for doing this, and I'll send you a link to this video once it's out.
Okay, and I will send you a link to the tool, or I'll inform you by email.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Okay,
bye-bye.
bye bye.